Started already? Good morning. Live stream from New York City, my house. As you see, the outside of New York is very bad weather today. And because of the daylight saving, winter time, maybe now is the Asian people is very late night, or I should say early morning, and European people 1 hour different. I don't. So then West Coast is people still sleeping. Anyway, he's coming in a minute. Just enjoy the bad weather of the New York City George Washington Bridge. Thank you.
Anyway, well, here we are. I keep this.
Let me get.
I need.
Let me move.
Yeah, I need one. Hi, Max. 1 second, just in case. I'm going to go here. Why? You found the light. Thank you. Here we are. Put this here for now. Drink a little bit. Okay. I should put this somewhere. I think I'm going to put this here. I'm so grateful that people actually cleaned up the mess a little bit in this place. I was thinking to actually exhibit the natural view of this room, which is incredibly messy, but probably nicer the way it is now. Well, it certainly is than it was. Anyway, for you diehards who are still watching, even though it's almost 20 after 10, you okay? Yeah. And let me do do this once, one more. Okay. So here we are again, but now I have to make an important announcement that we will be moving definitely to YouTube from Facebook. And the next of our meetings, okay, will be on YouTube. If we can't get our act together by next week, I will actually not meet on Facebook with you, but we'll keep you appraised of what is happening. I think YouTube will be much better than this. But for the moment, here we are, we're back. And as usual in my most recent live streams, I start out in a very confused way. I have a lot on my mind. There's a lot that has happened. I have many impressions, and how to organize them. I come back now from teaching, etc. I don't know why I should make excuses, but in any case, very late at night, with other things on my mind, and then I start thinking about this. I've been thinking about it for a while, sort of gathering little bits and pieces of information always, and I'm always reading and trying to take parts of books I've been reading, what things interesting for the live stream, but organizing it. Now I start thinking about it, and I think, oh, well, maybe I'll think about this in the morning. And then the morning comes, and I go, oh no, I haven't thought about this. So, with that excuse, caveat, or whatever, I will begin this live stream. Welcome, all of you. For some of you, this may actually be 1 hour earlier, which is probably nice. But as the world much of the world sort of turns the same way, although maybe not completely in sync, probably it's, for most of you, it's basically the same. 10 o'clock this time is whatever time it is in your part of the world, if you are in another part of the world, yes. Okay, so wait, one more of this. This always helps me sort of focus. And just about every day, there is some article somewhere about whether coffee is good for you or bad for you. Whether it protects you from all sorts of things or actually exacerbates conditions that we should not have, I should say. But I think, at least for me, it's a good thing. But we all have different metabolisms, I guess. And my father, for instance, I think I must have mentioned this probably more than once. He drank coffee simply like water, and it never affected him whether it was late at night or early in the morning. Whatever, it was sort of just a nice warm drink. Of course, that was the age before espresso. But I think that the caffeine quantity in espresso is actually less than it is in a lot of regular coffee. Two reasons for this. One is basically the amount that you drink is much smaller in each one, even though it is more concentrated. And actually three reasons, I would say. And caffeine is water soluble. So the highest caffeinated coffees, traditionally in New York at least, came from what is actually now a dying breed, these coffee shops, which served what the French called jus de sauce, or there's a juice of socks, or we call it dishwater. But what I saw many times is I don't think you even call these people chefs, perhaps, but I should not talk badly, though, because these different coffee shops were hangouts of mine in critical periods. Also, when I had to stay up late and whatever but I would see very often that they would use this big container, sort of with a sort of huge filter on top, and pour the coffee in there. And then, of course, what they would do is the coffee would go through, and then would take a big other container, fill it with the coffee that had gone through, and pour it back into it, and do that a few times. I don't think it made the coffee any stronger, but at all, any sort of tastier. But it really did increase the caffeine content of the coffee. And there were times I was actually grateful for that. Okay, I don't know why I'm talking about this. Of course, speaking about coffee, they still exist, but they are also a kind of dying breed. And these in New York City's Cuban Chinese dives, perhaps, well, restaurants that way, and they always served. This is either cafe negro or cortadito, as they said, or whatever, which were actually different kinds of espresso drinks. And it's another. They were also hangouts of mine. And though I haven't been there recently, there still are some left, but these are kind of, both of them are endangered species, I think, at the moment. I think that's, in a way, a particular shame. Okay, one more coffee. More than one. Okay. And last night I hadn't really even decided what to talk about, particularly in terms of music especially, although I did have my political rant rather sketched out in my mind. But musically, I decided that I would go through some of the topics which have been suggested to me, but which I haven't actually gotten around to. And so we will go through some of those. But first, I talk about what I want to in the political sphere, and it's, I think, very important now. Especially the New York Times, often I read it. This is a kind of ritual in the morning. I go through the New York Times and the Washington Post and sort of skim things, go through certain things in detail. And I find, especially in the New York Times, that very often there's a decided lack of actual news. It's just this and that and the other thing, which is completely irrelevant, with certain headlines which do have this kind of quality of news, but often have simply quality of promoting one thing or another, rather than actually describing what is happening. And this sort of goes along with what I would say is the popular so-called expert views, or views of so-called serious people. Of course, now a lot of this has to do with this frightful inflation that we are experiencing, although this is completely unbelievably understandable, and is something which was foreseen by many people, but somehow not by these so-called serious people. So this is there's hysteria now about a kind of inflation, which is simply the product of an opening of society, but a hesitating opening, of course, because the COVID-19 has not disappeared from the world. The coronavirus is still a danger in certain places like Romania, as I mentioned, and it's Tanzania, in Africa, other places in Africa, throughout Eastern Europe, even in Russia is, and I would have to say that Germany is also experiencing now renewed spikes. There's a so-called fourth wave coming with the societies where there is or has been, I should say, a large percentage of the population vaccinated. At least the fatalities are down, but in other places where, of course, has been minimal vaccination, fatalities are rising now. And here I'm sounding the alarm. But this week in the New York Times, there have been a few actual op-eds and editorials, which I found to be much more interesting, informative, and important than usual, I would say. But before that, I just a little bit, I speak about how refugees and called migrants, etc., or whatever you want to call them, are used as political footballs to rile people's feelings, let's say, and also to use them for particular kinds of political gain this way. And now, of course, we have it's in a certain way catastrophe of the migrants or refugees coming from the Middle East, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, etc., to Belarus, and Belarus is channeling them to Poland, and of course Poland is not accepting them. So these refugees, I should say, who again have been promised passage in their own countries. Of course, they arrive and they don't. They're just used for political purposes, and people start to, throughout the world, to begin to worry about the humanitarian effect, but and finally don't do very much at all. It's, now, in this case, of course, this is the migrants have been flying to Belarus either through Turkey or through Emirates or some. Often with the assistance of travel agents, and then the Belarus, basically security forces, shuttle them in a way to the border, sort of take them and move them to the border with Poland, and there they are, basically stranded this way. And what should I say? This is in the New York Times and in all the newspapers now, and officials say that the leader of Belarus is Lukashenko. And I should say that Belarus is also suffering from quite elevated COVID-19 numbers. And so this movement of people through is also dangerous from the point of view of the pandemic. Officials say that he is using migrants as weapons to retaliate against the European community for imposing sanctions. This is after he had this 2020 election, which seemed very obvious that it was in fact fraudulent, and that he is, Lukashenko threatened to cut off the gas supplies of gas, natural gas, which is pumped from Russia through Belarus into Poland and then into the Western Europe this way. Now, of course, Russia, which is sort of watching this whole thing, then stated that Belarus will not do that. But Russia has not clamped down on Belarus to try to alleviate this humanitarian crisis with these huge numbers of migrants or refugees coming into the country. The UN Security Council is discussing this crisis, but of course is not coming to any decision because you have too many parties who have too many interests. We see this all the time, of course, where there should be a unity of action. There's, in fact, a fracturing of any possible unity. Okay, it's enough of that. And hopefully I won't spend so much time this, but the articles, I start with one today. There's I should say the op-eds and the editorials, and this is in the New York Times, and it's the title is "Surveillance Capitalism" by Shoshana Zuboff, who is says professor emeritus at Harvard Business School and author of the book "Surveillance Capitalism," which I haven't read, but it's on the one hand it seems like a very interesting book. On the other hand, it's something which in fact I've touched on in earlier live streams, but this op-ed actually sort of focuses on it in a very kind of succinct way. Okay, now it starts off with Facebook, of course, and this is beginning. That's the article mentions how in a single decade became $1 trillion corporation by applying the logic of surveillance capitalism, which is an economic system, so that based on, as the author writes, the secret extraction and manipulation of human data. Now, of course, this is all something that we know. You see, so what has happened is that our data has become privatized without our consent. But it's even more than that, though. And of course, Facebook just built on what Google started. And Google began with a search engine, which was, once again, I should mention that all these things perhaps begin in a kind of productive or good way, even perhaps sometimes in maybe a benevolent way, but are quickly transformed by the possibilities of making a lot of money. That's very... So, first they have the search engine, and then Google's team learned how to combine these a lot of data flows of personal information to predict where ads should be placed for what they call maximum click-through. From my own personal experience, the placement of ads in when I'm trying to sort of surf the web or whatever is absolutely absurd. In fact, and this is another problem with this sort of these search engines and this data mining that they have, that in fact what is mined and what these algorithms actually focus on, I could say, and this is of course from people who are actually writing them, is kind of the most primitive. Now, that's the issue that I see. Yeah. Okay. Now, but I go back to this. Now, they said that the company's servers, this is Google, as they searched and browsed Google's pages, the Google scientists learned how to extract predictive metadata from the data, this exhaustive data that they would get, and analyze likely patterns of future behavior. In my case, I by mistake click on something, and then I keep getting these ads, and I keep trying to destroy them and burn them, but they keep coming back. Yeah, so this is future behavior. And now, the founder of Google, Larry Page, in 2001, this is according to, it's in a book written by Douglas Edwards, who was Google's first brand manager. The book is called I'm Feeling Lucky. He said, storage is cheap, cameras are cheap, people will generate enormous amounts of data. Everything you've ever heard or seen or experienced will become searchable. This was the principle of Google. Your whole life will be searchable. Now that is absolutely true, and of course very scary in ways, but we've known this, well, at least since 2001, so that's in other words for the past 20 years. Now, this is part of this op-ed. Instead of selling search to users, Google survived by turning its search engines into a sophisticated surveillance medium for seizing human data. And the point is that the company made sure to try to keep these operations secret, hidden from the users and the lawmakers, competitors, etc. And this is very typically capitalistic. And as Mr. Edwards, this is Douglas Edwards in this book, wrote, Mr. Page opposed anything that might stir the privacy pot and endanger our ability to gather data. That's Now, then, of course, the article goes on and says that in the economic context in which this is the economic context in which disinformation wins. And this was 2017. There's Eric Schmidt, who was the executive chairman of Google's then and now parent company, it's called Alphabet, acknowledged that the role of Google's algorithmic ranking operations spreads corrupt information. And he said, apparently, there is a line that we can't really get across. It is very difficult for us to understand truth. In other words, the difference between truth and falsehood. A company with a mission to organize and make accessible, well, not really make accessible, but to organize all the world's information using the most sophisticated machine systems, cannot discern corrupt information. This is an essential problem of artificial intelligence, AI, that and the big danger of promotion too quickly of systems of artificial intelligence. That's okay. You see, and it goes on. It says, with privacy out of the way, ill-gotten human data are concentrated within private corporations where they are claimed as corporate assets. So this is the major issue, is that the data becomes the property of these organizations, of Google, Facebook, even Apple, etc., these the tech companies, which are in a certain sense if not ruling the world, coming close to it. So, now, there's a 2018 Facebook document which described its artificial intelligence hub ingesting trillions of behavioral data points every day and producing 6 million behavioral predictions each second. I mean, this is really nuts. And of course, the bulk of it is total nonsense, like what I was talking about in terms of all the ads that I see coming. And because the whistleblowers who have been actually bearing, in a certain sense, the secrets of Facebook recently, perhaps depict this Zuckerberg as using algorithms to reinforce or disrupt the behavior of billions of people. So anger is rewarded or ignored, news stories become more trustworthy or unhinged. It's all, and this is all through the use of not only targeting, but targeting specific ways with what I call these sort of buzzwords, and I will get to that in a minute. And the back of this, though, I see, and I talked about this, Jane Mayer's book, Dark Money, and there's another book I want to simply mention now, which, let me get the cover, which I talked about early on in these live streams, and I've sort of come back to it, and I will speak about this more later as well. Do you find that? Is that okay? This is Kurt Andersen's Evil Geniuses. And what we see there is how you have these organizations set up by the Koch brothers, set up by, these billionaires and corporations to basically take business and how should I say, sort of separate business from people, that's it. And not only that, but say that, well, what we need is business, that way, and that way. And how that, in fact, is at the root of a lot of what we see happening in terms of the problems that big data is creating, you can say, and with, okay. You see, the article goes on and it says that, but like global warming, the tech giants and their fellow travelers have been willing to treat their destructive effects on people and society as simply as collateral damage. And of course, this is very much the issue when you separate business and people. See? So what is important is the business and what effects it can have, sort of, which are perhaps unintended, or I should not even say unintended, but not paid attention to, I would say. That is collateral damage. So the problem of lead in the water, flint, which hasn't been, is maybe just now being cleaned up. I'm not even exactly sure about that. Flint, Michigan. That is collateral damage. Now, it was not, the idea was not to actually poison people, but the idea was, well, we have business. And so this is part of business. And of course, what happened is that you had the poisoning of the water. That was collateral damage. Yeah. Similarly, and in a way, this is globally even more destructive. The misinformation and I should say the, the fracturing of people into groups which are poised against one another, which is very much a product of even now of Facebook, of Google, of these sort of targeting things in the most primitive way. Again, is just collateral damage, because what do they want? They just want to increase their bottom line. Now, we go back to Milton Friedman, this economist, and Hayek, who maintained that, of course, the business of business and what business should be concerned about is simply the profit margins, and that the market will take care of basically social concerns. Of course, we've seen for hundreds of years, if not thousands of years, that this is total nonsense. And of course, this goes back to all the way back before the Great Depression, to Herbert Hoover, and was mentioned that the business of business is business. Business is that, right? It's very interesting how these sort of new ideas are actually old ideas, in a way that sense. Okay, I know I'm blabbing, but I continue with this. And I will make connections at this. Another very good op-ed by Jamel Bowie. I think that's how you pronounce the name. I always mispronounce everything, I think. Even words I should know well sometimes. This is a recent op-ed of his, which in the New York Times, which was about structural racism. And this, I think, is very important. And it's something also that I have talked about. And it has to do with the difference between society and culture. And he mentioned a book from 1948, which I didn't know about, but after he mentioned it, I did actually get a copy. This was by the scholar Oliver Cromwell Cox, called Caste, Class, and Race, A Study in Social Dynamics. And what that book was an answer to Gunnar Myrdal's very influential and famous study. It's something that I actually knew when I was and went through when I was a young student. This way, the study was called "An American Dilemma: The Negro Problem and Modern Democracy," where he actually, I shouldn't say postulated, but stated and showed in this study. I get more news alert about another rise in COVID-19 infections. This is from Apple News. Anyway, I'm hoping that everything will go away. Well, it doesn't. Anyway, now I go back to my now he said, "One man is white." This is from Myrdal's book, and this is. I found that study very problematic when I was reading it. I didn't quite know why at the time, but then I really understood finally. And this study of Oliver Cromwell Cox presents the problems of what Myrdal wrote in a very clear and succinct, well, not succinct because it's 600 pages way. In any case, I go back to Myrdal, and he states, "One man is white, another is black. The cultural opportunities of these two men may be the same, but since the black man cannot become white, there will always be a white caste and a black caste." In a certain way, we say, okay, that's 100% right. What I'm not so sure myself. Now, this is in the op-ed. In Cox's reading of Myrdal, caste exists as an independent force. Now, this is in my reading also, and I think generally in the reading, directing the energies and activities of black and white people alike. Now, the solution to the race problem in this vision is to shake whites from their psychological commitment to the caste system. Or, as Cox summarizes the point, if the race problem in the United States is preeminently a moral question, or, as I would put it, a cultural question, it naturally has to be resolved by moral means, or, as I would say, more generally, by cultural means. But Cox says this is nonsense. And this is very, very important for us and the world to understand. Now, for us to understand, of course, because we are, as musicians, for those of us who are musicians, who are watching who are musicians, we are cultural emissaries. We deal in culture. We promote culture this way. Okay, that I will come back to that. I don't know. Do we have? Are you okay? Okay. I'm sorry. I'm being left all alone here with a camera just in my face. Okay. Maybe that gives me more freedom just to pontificate this way. Okay. So, as I mentioned, for Cox, this moral issue or cultural issue is nonsense. We cannot defeat race, he said, prejudice by proving that it is wrong, he writes. The reason for this is that race prejudice is only a symptom of a materialistic social fact. Now, this actually seems to be even more obvious. Specifically, race prejudice is supported by a peculiar socioeconomic need which guarantees force in its protection, and as a consequence, it is likely that at its centers of initiation, force alone will defeat it. That is something. Yes. well, you can say force. Litigation is a kind of force. Programs for economic change is a kind of force also. Now, this understanding was in fact a very important point. Oh, sorry. I think that, no, I can't. I don't know why this even rang. It's my dentist, but I'll get back to him after this. I wish he would be watching this, but of course not. So Martin Luther King Jr., before he was assassinated, actually was mobilizing the Poor People's Campaign. So this is essential to him, was the idea that poverty, inequality, lack of economic opportunity was at the basis, so socioeconomic issues were at the basis of the cultural problem of racism. And terribly, with the great tragedy, his life was cut short, and after him, nobody had the charisma to carry this through and actually create substantive change. Okay. Now I continue a bit. It's actually getting a little bit late. Yeah. And the way I see things myself, I think that what you have is that often cultural issues here create sort of pressure points. They're pressure points or buzzwords, as I've said, that create knee-jerk responses which are devoid of actual content in a way. And the content, or rationalizations, I should come afterwards as a means of justifying or excusing an emotional reaction. Now, of course, this is what the primitive algorithms of, I don't know why I should say, they are primitive, but I think that perhaps they cannot be anything but primitive, of these huge companies such as Facebook have been able, those primitive algorithms have been able to spark incredible divisiveness in the world. Now, what I mean by that, for instance, somebody is you mentioned, for instance, someone who is gay or homosexual, something like that, and so everyone else says, no, these people are immoral. They have to be put in jail. They have to be done this, that, the other thing to them. Now, this person who was saying this, if you would actually think about it, and that this is a big problem for society, if he said that I am, even if I would say, and this is, let's say, well, I am normal, even. and I just want to use this as an example, let's say, for this person who is, let's say, a bigot. I'd say that I am normal, but if I'm normal, why should I fear something else if I am normal, which means that I will not be, in a way, corrupted. And again, all this I make in parentheses, because this is not anything that I actually personally believe, but I want to create a scenario with that. Corrupted by this sort of abnormality. So what? You see. But it's just someone has this feeling of this way, and then creates a whole world of justification for why we need to put these other people away. And this is incredible nonsense. But it's just that one word. And this we see in very many parts of society. You know? And I just make that as an example because as we all know, sexual orientation is something that is just yours or just mine. It's not something that I can force on someone else, or something that my sexuality will be corrupted by someone else. That's, completely obvious medical fact. And yet you still have this tremendous, even nowadays, that's reaction against someone who is different, let's say, in this way. Okay, that's one thing. Now, I go to a couple more interesting articles in the New York Times, and actually one in the Washington Post from just today. And one had to do with swing voters. And that is rather interesting, because while people as groups have voted in certain ways, one second, it's a new poll has actually finds that individually, in fact, people tend to be much more liberal than they are in groups. You see. And one thing that's found in this survey, which the New York Times actually noted, is that populism, they say, is popular. Now, it said the most successful soundbite of this was what is called progressive populist ones. It was something like this: the country belongs to all of us, not just the super rich. But for years, politicians in Washington have turned their backs on people who work for a living. Now, of course, you have Thomas Franks, whatever happened to Kansas, et cetera, et cetera. This is, again, things that we know about. We need tough leaders who won't give in to the millionaires and the lobbyists, but will fight for good jobs, good wages, guaranteed health care, et cetera, for every single. Now, what's interesting about that is you have the sort of working class swing voters, so-called, actually rate that as the most positive soundbite. And that's regardless of whether they are Republican or Democrat. You see. But yet, they will vote in different ways. And the way I see that is, actually, there's a lot of studies have been done, many studies have been done about the fact that the group dynamics and individual dynamics are very different, and how people can be mobilized in a group to act in a certain way, which they would never act as individuals. And it's this sort of dividing into groups that causes many, many problems in the world, I believe. And I've always mentioned that we need to be one group and not different groups here. Okay, so people say, well, I'm just some kind of a dreamer. Of course I am. Now, along those lines, this is Krugman, who is very much the middle of the road fellow, but sometimes also has very decent articles with information. He also wrote this week. He said, and he was writing about the fact, and this is something that the Washington Post just wait a second. I got myself totally mixed up here. Here, sorry. Yeah, Washington Post just mentioned, actually, first of all, that the economy now is, let's say, the Bureau of Labor Statistics in October mentioned that the country added more jobs in the month, or actually since, I should say, I'll read the final part. And since Biden took office, the U.S. has added more than 5.6 million jobs. Now, this reflects the rebound from the lows of the pandemic, but it also means that in the first 9 months of his presidency, more jobs have been added than in the last 3 Republican administrations. That's covering 16 years of those administrations. Now, of course, the news created a rally on the stock market. The other thing, though, is that in September, a record 4.4 million Americans quit their jobs. And so we do have, even though we have a huge increase in them, we still have a problem of employers trying to find workers, let's say, but they quit their jobs because that this is according to the Washington Post. They say there's still problems of finding childcare for people. There are better wages elsewhere, and also in certain parts of the country, still rising COVID cases. So this is all very obvious. But in fact, we do have great momentum in the economy, I say, despite problems of the supply, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. This is, so the news, help, I did something wrong here. I did something else wrong here. I tap in the wrong place, and it's like, huh? this has to go back to here. I go back to Krugman, the article. I'm just talking and talking and talking. It's 1 hour already, I know. And I promised to stop. So they said that, but despite what is actually happening in the economy, there are news organizations that have been trying to convey the impression that everything is in trouble. Okay. And what we have found, that you have, for instance, on Fox News, they were showing empty shelves because of supply chain issues, etc. And these segments about the so-called empty shelves during the Biden economy, during the present economy, were taken from photos which were taken last year, from 2020, before this, or in fact in other countries. You see. Now, we were talking before about Facebook and the problem of big data, but we also have the problem of targeted misinformation by major news organizations. Yeah. Okay. Now, as finally, he said, Krugman says, inflation and shortages of goods are real issues, but most of the economic discontent seems to be based on news reports and partisan leanings. So when you have also polls talking to many people saying, well, they say that, the economy is in bad shape, but the poll is, if it's well, how about you? Are you in bad shape? Oh no, not particularly. No, I wouldn't say so. I can't say that I'm in bad shape, but the economy is in bad shape. You see, this is again the power of so-called buzzwords, which lose their actual meaning this way. And I come now to my essential point here, and I'm not going to go through. I had a lot more to talk about in this, but I should get on with what I'm doing to something to deal with music, perhaps. The essential point, and this is important for us as emissaries of culture, is the sense of framing. And this is what have been very frustrated looking at sort of political discussions, with very few exceptions. I see, especially on the side of progressives, let's say, a lack of really, it's not positive framing, but it is effective framing, I should say. And by framing, I mean what actually Trump was very good at doing was actually these sort of sound bites which give people a kind of emotional reaction. Now, I think I've talked about this before, but this is, let's say, let's go back, I should say, to one of the second, I think, of the debates between the two, where Trump was talking about the ridiculous affordable affordable health care, affordable air. Well, I hope air stays to be affordable. That's in the dystopian future, probably not. But the Affordable Health Care Act, which does have lots of problems, and basically it has problems because it doesn't have this universal health care mandate, or universal single payer as it was, and it's Trump sort of started yelling that everything's going to be socialism. It's going to be socialism. This is a very big buzzword, which is completely devoid of any content, of course. And he says, well, and there are people who love their insurance. And I listened to that. I think I mentioned all of this before, but I mentioned it again because it's anyway very apropos of what is happening now also. I listen to that and I say, nobody loves their insurance. They may like the result of their insurance. They probably, hopefully like, even if it's medical insurance, they like their doctors. They trust their doctors, perhaps, this way. They don't want to find out that they cannot actually visit their doctors because of a change in their insurance or whatever. That way. Now, if you have the same what should I say? Everything. Let's say everything in the situation is the same. So you can go to your doctor, it's the same. You can go to your clinic, you can do everything you want. However, there is just one single payer for insurance, so-called. And it's amazing that to think that you actually have insurance for health. It's just you should have measures to take care of people. But if, let's say, everything's the same, you would feel exactly the same. It's not like, oh, everything's the same, but I lost my great insurance company. I feel so sad. But I can still go to my doctor, and I don't pay as much money. And I have even more possibilities for tests, etc., etc. Because I don't have to pay out of pocket for certain things, which my old lovely insurance. Plus, it's easier for me to change jobs because my insurance is not wedded to my work. So why in this debate, why couldn't that have been the framing of Biden, for instance? When he said, I love insurance, Biden could say very easily that nobody loves their insurance. They love their doctors, maybe, and this and that. But of course he wouldn't say that because the economic power of insurance companies is so great. So his lips are sealed in that way. You see. But if you can break out of that, we can possibly actually have change and have electoral change as well. Now, there's something else just before I go, and I know it's already 11:30. This is ridiculous. It would be 12:30 a few days ago. Now, a problem with this build better again. This and the bills which have been a little whittled down before that the sort of reconstruction of the economy that the Biden administration was hoping for, that a lot of what people are saying, this especially, for instance, this Joe Manchin, or Mankin. See, again, I don't know the. Is it raining now? Yeah, it's raining outside a lot. Wow. You see, I'm in the wrong way. But we can see a lot of rain. Uh-huh. Well, nature is nature. Yeah. He said that, well, he's worried, and people are worried that the United States will become an entitlement society. And again, we come back to this issue of culture. And what was so often used as an excuse for doing nothing, which is that there is a culture of poverty. We should not encourage the culture of poverty. So you don't relieve people's burdens, because they become victims of the entitlement society. I got the message. Enough of this. But this is basically, I missed last week and other weeks, and this is basically what I want to talk about. And music is not an entitlement. Music is a part of our nature as a species. But it was not in the forefront of my mind this week. Anyway, okay, I move on. I'll come back to all of this, I think. And I should say also, the music should be, and classical music also, should be a populist kind of activity. It should be an activity like it was at one point, an activity for everybody. I talk about that also. Okay, later. Now I go back and talk a little bit about, if I can find what I need, and because I have this, should be, dun, 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 here we are. Okay, I moved to music now, and the first thing, I have there's a list of topics which were suggested when I asked about them, and many of them I covered, but many of them I didn't cover. There were really a lot, and there still are. Okay, the first thing, this is by, I don't say the names, but one is how to figure out how much mouthpiece is right for you to take in, and how to do it consistently. The answer I have to that question is I've given lots of exercise with the rubber band, with this, most recently with that idea. So it's not simply that the amount of mouthpiece you take in, but the fact that you actually take in the mouthpiece. So the feeling of going in the mouth is important. And that has to do with the feeling of balance that I was talking about also. I'm sitting down, so I'm sort of balanced on the chair. But the idea that you feel that the clarinet, in a way, holds you up. And what we can feel is here, this way, here. So we take this and we go in and in. And we press up and in here. That way. And that we have, what is important there is the beginning of this. So it's also in order to feel this kind of suction, you try to open the mouth, but you're also keeping the lips closed this way. And you see, this person also, how not to disengage the embouchure when going up large intervals. Let's say throat up to altissimo, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now, this is the point with this. You see, that it has to do with these half-truths that I've been talking about since the very beginning of the pandemic, when you're playing instruments in general, and the clarinet specifically here, the idea that you do keep your embouchure engaged, and you see, keep the embouchure rock steady with no jaw moving and good use of corners of mouth. So these are all things that I have, in a certain sense, debunked, or tried to at least. So first of all, I talk about corners of the mouth once again. And for most of you, this is probably very boring because I've been talking about it for years. But the idea of the corners, good use of corners of the mouth, is also a misnomer, because our physiology here is such that if we push the corners in, we lose structure in the middle. Go like that. I just push the corners in and I can hardly speak. However, if you feel that the corners are actually going in as a result of the stretch of the mouth. And if you do this, you don't go, doesn't work. Has to. Corners are in. You see. And the fact that I stretch this way allows me to have developed strength of muscles around here. So when I circular breathe, and I'm playing this weird mouthpiece and terrible reed, I just spout that out. But this way, you'll see that my muscles here do not collapse, but they're very strong because I've practiced this stretching for such a long time that the corners, in fact, are being put to good use like that. See, but this whole point of going like that is total misunderstanding of what actually should happen. Okay, now, the embouchure, of course, again, is not rock steady. Never has been rock steady, I should say, but should actually change in a very organized way. In that sense, the change should be rock steady. What should I say? Flow steady? I don't know. That's this way. So with its knowledge of the different partials, things like that, you find how the embouchure actually, or how we manipulate the embouchure in a very structured way to move through the different intervals. And with that in mind, the hands are very important as well. That's why I mentioned that the two thumbs of ours are perhaps the most important part of our embouchure, because without those thumbs, the clarinet falls down. And that happens even if you're using a strap, because a strap anyway pulls your body down this way. And if you're playing, as he said, from throat tones to altissimo, something like that, for instance, the problem is that you're going to the fifth partial, and this is why I think the knowledge of partials actually has to precede everything else in a way, and has to become really automatic this way. I'm saying that for the students who are watching this, and who will be watching this, hopefully, because even students that I've been teaching for a while, I ask, well, what partial is it? And they go, is it this? They should know like that, because that is associated with a very particular kind of embouchure. Okay. So you go something like that, let's say, and the basic problem is if you are going without pulling the instrument up, the clarinet falls down, and you get that. So you have to pick up the instrument with your thumbs, and a lot of times you use the left thumb. In a certain time, like I'm using this A here, I should stand up, but I don't feel like it right now. I'm going to sit down. I'll stand right. But I don't need this here at all, right? I think we can add that to Mozart side, and I put this away also because I'm not. And I'll bring this back actually no. Because I will be talking about a couple other things which I don't not remember. So I'm going to put this over here. I think that makes sense. Okay, so in this case, I pull the clarinet there. Now the essential part of playing any instrument, of singing, of walking down the street, is rhythm. So, and if I'm making an interval like that, I'm actually I'm moving in rhythm this way. And so what I would say, rather than what is how to keep rock steady embouchure, whatever, is how to have an embouchure in rhythm, and how to move the clarinet in rhythm this way. And rhythm involves what we can call periodicity. So it's not like the like that, but there's a period. That's why the quintessential rhythmic motion is the circle. See, in the circle, larger circle is smaller, and then we have the spiral as it gets faster, as it gets smaller this way, but it has a rhythm. So if I'm doing this interval that way, I'm going one there. Now we can practice that in a kind of, I would call it digitized way. And that way is you subdivide the amount of time you are taking for the interval. And let's say you're doing 1, 2. So you do 1, and then at the end, so these are just a quarter note, this will be at the 8th note. You do 1, and you move the clarinet here. You pull it into your mouth on the 8th note. Uh-oh, something happening again? No? Well, okay, it's 11:45 already. So that, and then you can graduate from there to a more fluid understanding of the motion. This way. And you should practice this. And I've gone through earlier exercises about this and all. Okay, so this is, well, you don't disengage the embouchure, but you actually work with it in a rhythmic way. Okay, blah, blah, blah. Okay, now proper hand position and how to maintain it. This is, again, the issue of hand position is another kind of half-truth. The one thing that I've been more and more concerned with is the fact that most people I see actually do not have a form of motion. And you can look at a position in a general way. A position can have that has motion this way. In that means that they do not have hand position, and especially the people who try to have the steadiest hand position have the most erratic hand motion. You see, so in other words, you're playing here, let's say, be something like that. And you try to always keep the fingers close here, but you can't move. Well, I've talked about the rotation, about motion this way. Yeah. Or they play something like that, so that the motion is very choppy this way, while in fact you have this kind of controlled sense of motion. That's why form, just like if you're a dancer, it's not only the move that's important, but the form of the move is most important. I don't know why I'm sitting down. I became glued to this seat. So I hope I can get up after this is over. Anyway, and a lot of times I feel people move this way, that way, this way, whatever. They move this way and that way, rather than feel a directed motion. So if I'm playing here, I go da-da, and it's not simply that I'm lifting the fingers this way. And I tell people, well, you should lift the fingers more. They go, okay, yeah. That way, something like that. And I go, that's not really what I mean by that. It's the form. And I have this feeling that the hand has a shape here. Now, I was always told that we move our fingers from this joint here. We have basically all our fingers have 3 joints. The thumb is 1, 2, but the third is all the way up here. But anyway, it's that allows us both strength and possibilities of opposing the thumb to the rest of the hand. But that's a different issue. But the 3 joints here, this way. So we move from that joint. Now, the thing is that is, again, a half-truth. And I've talked about this. Also, everything I'm talking about now is old information. So, this is the hinge here, but the knob of the door, for instance, of the finger is here, from the tip of the finger. So it's as if I take it here and I go up. Take it here and I go. Take it here. I go up. Take it here. And I go up. I take them all. I go up that way. So I don't go this way or that way or that way. You see. So there is almost a sense that this here has a shape which has a position. That's why I'm talking about half-truths. So if I play, I'm that way. Let's say I play that way. But you notice my hands always have a form, a shape. They're not just anywhere. Something like that. And that enables them to actually traverse, I should say, complicated passages with ease. Anyway, so even, let's say I have a chromatic scale here. All of this, I'm actually not moving this finger this way. I'm not going, but I'm holding it and I'm changing the angle here. That way. Similarly, if I'm playing, I'm almost not moving my fingers, but I'm moving the hand. So da-da-da-dee, da-da, that way. And that, the thing. Something, dee-do-dee-do-dee. See, I hold the hand in particular shape. So in this sense, you're actually right, there is a hand position. But this hand position is for different passages. And the hand position will change for the different passages, but in a structured way. So that's that. Okay. There's a lot more. This is best practices for common orchestral excerpts, clarinet solos from orchestral repertoire. That will be another subject, because that really depends, and I've also talked about that, on knowing the context of the orchestral excerpt. Which means where it is in the actual piece. Because orchestral excerpts are these little fragments there, and we have traumatic feelings about these 4 measures of a piece which may last an hour. You see. Anyway, okay. Let's see. Now, intelligent practicing. I think I've talked about that a lot, and about the 3 kinds of pieces there. I will speak about that later. Let's see if there's something else I should talk about. This has to do with memory. Yeah, there are a couple people about memory. Solo piece from memory. Why don't more clarinetists do that? I've talked about this, and it's just not tradition. And this was my big problem when I was a student there. And I went to the Moscow Conservatory, and all of a sudden I had to play everything from memory. And it was like, whoa, I've never done that, even though I was concertizing as a teenager in the United States this way. But I'm very glad to have had this kind of discipline. And the importance of playing by heart or playing by memory is simply that you learn the piece better. And it's not necessarily the case that your playing will be freer. This will depend both on the person and on the piece. And most often, I think that people, when they're playing by memory, do not play freer because they memorize not simply notes in the abstract, but they memorize the actual gesture. And that's why, for me, often, if I play from music, I have sometimes more ideas about improvising inside the piece, etc., etc. But there are pieces which I know very well, and I have. It's not a brilliant photographic memory, but it is a kind of visual memory. So the pieces that I have a fairly good visual memory of, especially, I can play with a lot of sense of freedom by memory that way. But it took me a lot of practice to do this. And of course, people who do memorize from a very early age have it easier because they're more used to it. Very simple. But as I said before, playing by heart, playing by memory is good because you learn the piece much better. You practice the easy parts of the piece, not only the difficult parts of the piece, and you probably practice the piece as a whole more than you would if you were just reading it from the music. So that's the point. And personally, I don't care at all whether you are play from the music or you play from memory. I don't care. But as a teacher, I ask people to play from memory because the discipline is very useful, and I found that for myself to be the case. This difference if I'm conducting, for instance, and I do a decent amount of conducting, ensembles, orchestras, I like to do from memory because I like to have the contact with the group members rather than with the score. So that's a different issue, and the way of learning a piece as a conductor is very different from learning a piece as an instrumentalist, because you don't have the physical sense except for your beat patterns, which are unbelievably simple, even if you're beating 7 against 5, at least for me they are. While even though I have a lot of experience playing the clarinet, for instance, I still have to practice things because of the complexity of technique involved in actually playing an instrument. So I think that's it. Intonation I have here. They're talking more about the Mühlfeld clarinet. All that's great about what shall we do when we're not successful. That's a very heartbreaking topic, which I don't have unbelievable insights about, but I do have something to say probably about that. And something about equipment, long facings of mouthpieces as opposed to short facings. This is all stuff like that. What is to be gained from studying the 6 Bach cello suites, particularly for those who do a lot of improvisation. And that's, I will talk later. So I think I actually stop now. It's plenty of time because it's almost 12. And I will end, though, if that's can work out, with at least one or maybe two more caprices of Cavallini, just because it's nice to have a bit of fun at the end. Okay, is that possible or not? Yes? Okay, so then we will do that, and everyone be well, and I will see you next. I hope I can keep my word on YouTube.
Thank you.